Hello, BookTube. How are you doing today? Coming to actually give a review, or at least discuss a bit, one of my March of the Mammoths books. That book was Adam Levin's The Instructions. Talked briefly about it in my introduction to it and an update, but I thought I would take some time to actually dedicate a video to it. Let you know what the book is about. Like I said, it was the author is Adam Levin. The Instructions. I had never heard about it before. I said in a previous video, I actually found out about it March 31st, almost at midnight. I didn't hear about March of the Mammoths and was laying in bed just getting ready to go to sleep, but browsing through YouTube and came across the challenge. Got up, looked at my library, and though I had a lot of books that were that long, they were either books that maybe I've started and didn't quite make it all the way through, or books that I knew would just take too long to get through. So I took some time and, well, not really a whole lot of time, but opened up Google and started doing a search and popped across this one. In a way, I'm surprised I didn't hear about it because the book is very much in my wheelhouse. It was immensely enjoyable. It's 1,065 pages, but it read like something that was a few hundred pages. Really enjoyable book. From that standpoint, a very fast reading book, if that could be said for a Mammoth. So at any rate, like I said, I thought I would talk about it a little bit. The book was put out, I believe, in 2010. It was published by McSweeney's. And in the reviews that I saw, it was compared to David Foster Wallace. As I mentioned in a previous video, I don't think that comparison is accurate, at least not in total. We discussed that a little bit more in depth, but first let me give you a little bit of a summary. So the book is about a young 10-year-old named Gurion Ben Judah Maccabee. He is a 10-year-old who is part of a special ed program for disciplinary problems. He's locked in a program called The Cage, where students get locked in this room all day. He's been promoted up to 7th grade. The most interesting thing about Gurion is he's potentially the Messiah and thinks that he might be. The book details it. It all takes place in about 4 days' time. Of course, there are flashbacks and whatnot, and there's a little bit at the end that it extends beyond that time. One of the conceits about the book that made it real fun was that the entire book is actually scripture that he's writing. He like I said, he's potentially the Messiah. He doesn't don that role, but he believes that there could be potentially a Messiah in any generation, and based on stuff that's gone on in his life, he thinks that he very well could be that person. So he's number of problems that he had in the past led him to the cage problem. Not problems in the school that he's in, but in some Hebrew schools that he had been in, he ran into some trouble. The book has a number of metafictional tools. It starts off with a start very similar to what you see in Lolita, with a publisher's warning about the book that the proceeds from the book aren't going to support him, but it is going to support basically a cult that he set up. And the book starts off on the first few pages with, a couple kids in the cage, including Gurion, waterboarding each other to see what it's like to get near to death. And it just picks up from there and keeps rolling through the whole thing. The students that surround him, of course, are all troubled youth. A lot of damage, and damage is a big theme in this book. Like I said, it was immensely fun. I didn't really feel any kind of lag as we were going through the book. There are certainly times where he wanders off into digressions, but I thought they were fun. For the most part, it was also a fairly easy read. Keeping track of the plot wasn't too difficult. Now, maybe that's because I only read it over a few days time period or a couple of weeks, but most of my reading was pretty condensed. So that might play a part in it. But it was a pretty tight plot line. There weren't a whole lot of different plot lines or anything to keep track of. Mostly keeping track of the names, and there's a little bit of, I guess you would call it a dialect. There's a lot of Yiddish that's in the book, but you can pick up on what they're talking about there. Not all of it is common Yiddish, but over time you could start to pick up. And there's just some speech mannerisms and stuff that the kids in the cage wind up using. I could see a potential difficulty if you weren't familiar with the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, although there are references to Old and New. Most of the references are from the Torah. I have a degree in biblical studies, so that wasn't something, even though I'm not as familiar with rabbinical Judaism, modern rabbinical Judaism, there wasn't anything that really threw me for a loop, and that honestly, because I'm a bit of a theology nerd, was one of the highlights of the book for me. It's a part that I really did enjoy going through. Gurion views himself as a scholar. Other students around, he believes he has a natural gift for it, and so do many people around him, both students and some of the teachers at his past Hebrew schools. Or at least so he leads you to believe. Once again, he's the one writing this scripture. You're told very early on in the warning that something big is going to happen, that it leads to this both a very violent act, and that takes up about the last 200 pages of the book almost, and then also that there's a miracle at the end, but you're left wondering what it is the whole time through. Now, to digress a bit, I want to talk a little bit about this comparison with David Foster Wallace. A lot of reviews I looked at. I'd looked at one or two before buying the book, but like I said, it was really late on the first, and I wanted to get started. But saw comparisons there. It actually made me a little bit worried because I couldn't imagine tackling something like Infinite Jest during this month, just because it was such a dense read, and this really wasn't. But I really don't see, certainly there are some comparisons. The length of the book, the fact that it has footnotes, his footnotes weren't to the point of Wallace's. He had a few going through there, a few pages of footnotes, but you didn't have hundreds of pages of footnotes. You didn't have footnotes referencing footnotes. And Levin didn't really seem to be punishing the reader, which I think Wallace definitely did. And that's not to take away from Wallace. I really enjoyed Infinite Jest. It's one of my favorite books, and I like that antagonism, the playful antagonism toward the reader is something I really love about Infinite Jest, but I didn't see that here. I think also the style of the writing is different, and that's not to take away from either of them. The instructions also, once again, I got to give it time to sit, but it rang almost all of my bells. So it's something that could easily make it into a top list for me. It was a really, really fun book. Though it's a different topic than what I might write about, it fits within that wheelhouse of the stuff I like to write, getting bizarre, just a weird, fun, fast-paced fiction that also makes you think, and maybe makes the reader work a little bit. But like I said, it was just a different approach than Wallace has. Yes, there's a sadness to it, obviously coming up on this violence and seeing what's going on in here. Also for me, coming at it from a perspective as a Christian, seeing some of his exegesis of the passages and this longing and looking forward to the Messiah is something that personally was sad for me to look at. But at the same time, there wasn't that sadness that just underlied all of Infinite Jest. Now, maybe that's because I read Infinite Jest post Wallace's suicide, so I don't know if I'm carrying a little bit of that in there. But this book didn't seem to have that. It was a fast-paced romp, and that doesn't mean that it was without thinking. I can enjoy books like that, but I really like when a book gets you thinking and is making various references and such, be they theological or be they literary references. But like I said, I don't think the comparison is necessarily accurate, other than that it's a big book with footnotes. And it's dealing with youth, and the topic is a little bit bizarre. But that doesn't take away from Levin at all. It was a really fun book, and unfortunately it doesn't look like he's put much else out. He had a book of short stories that came out shortly after this one did, but haven't seen anything since, and I hope we see something from him in the future, because, like I said, I absolutely loved it. Would love to read more from him. So with that, like I said, I would highly recommend the book. I do want to discuss some spoilers. For the most part, I loved it. I would probably rate it 5 stars. It may be a book that I go back and read again. But I want to talk a little bit about the ending, just because it actually, at least initially, and I haven't had time to really let it sit. I finished the book, I think last Wednesday. So it sat for a few days, and I've gone back and looked at some things and appreciate the ending more. But at first, at the end of the book, it kind of felt like a cop-out. So from this point on, consider it a spoiler alert. If you've read the book, I would love to discuss it with you. Feel free to post in the comments, but also tag any spoilers, because I think it could be a real bum deal to get spoiled on a 1,000-page book. I think this book is definitely worth reading, but if you're spoiled on the end, and it does tell you a lot about the end up front, then it takes some of the joy away from reading and seeing what happens. So like I said, from here on out, spoiler alert. If you're going to cut out now, I should have more videos coming up with some other things of my other mammoths I'm working on. But from here on out, once again, spoiler warning. I can't say it enough. We're going to talk about the end. So as he moves into this day of damage, day of proper damage, that was fine and good, and 200 pages of it felt like it may have been building a little bit far, and I was fine with the student uprising and even the results. The death of Benji was something that I thought played well, but there were a couple things that wound up tweaking me. Mostly the end in the chapter titled Coda, where he's now left after the miracle happened, and during the time that after they marched out of the school, things just got very unclear, and I didn't feel that was really set up early in the book. Yes, a few chapters earlier he had talked about ambiguous endings, talking about Catcher in the Rye particularly, and he did a bit of a digression there, and so it was kind of some fun play, and it let you know that something like that was happening. But then not knowing how it wrapped up, just gave all these possibilities of what could have happened. Kind of left us hanging towards where Gurion is now. We have some clues. That was another thing that bothered me a bit. About halfway through the book, we were told that Gurion lived through this. And I suppose we were warned at the beginning also. But that also took some pressure away, because there were some hints that, a number of times through there, because he was the Messiah, he believed he might be the Messiah, he didn't believe he could die. And, but because of that, when you're setting something that up, that actually set me with the expectation of, okay, maybe he does die. That might be because in a lot of my writing, I like to kill off main characters and have unhappy endings, and I wouldn't necessarily call the ending of this a happy ending. But to be warned that the main character is going to make it through unscathed was a little bit of a letdown, especially since, like I said, that came about midway through the book. And like I said, after sitting on it, I went back and read both the publisher's warning and the first chapter, which really bookended the book nicely, and showed where he had set some things up there. But I don't know. I'm still torn. I think I might have liked a an ending. And I'm, once again, like I said, I like killing off characters. Spoiler alert for any books that you might eventually read of mine if I get published one day. I'm fine with unhappy endings and unsatisfactory endings. But it just would have been nice to see something wrapped up. It seemed like he was kind of copping out, taking a shortcut and avoiding making choices with what to do with his characters. So from that standpoint, I just would have liked to see a little bit more. But that might take a portion of a star away from it. But really, the book was so good up to that point that it really didn't. I can't recommend it enough. So if you have the inclination after March to go into another big book, highly recommend the instructions. It's an outstanding book, a book that I really enjoyed. It may be something I go back and read again. If you're watching this point with the spoilers, you know, he went into a little digression on discussing the disadvantages of not reading a book for the first time, but going back and looking at it again, that you never have the ability to see it with fresh eyes. You're always looking at how to connect things. And though he certainly has a number of connections through here, I think in part some of the joy of the book was seeing something that was fresh and new. So at any rate, that's my thoughts on it. If you have any questions for me or any comments, go ahead and place them in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.